Thinker Chatterjee, comrade Viman, comrade Yechury, the other leaders of the NBA on the stage, my dear comrades and friends. যে রকম টপিক আমাকে দিলেন আজকে বলবার জন্য, ওটা বাংলাতে বলবার ইম্পসিবল আমাকে। Neoliberalism, communalism or intellectual resistance. তাই জন্যে আমি প্রেসিডেন্টের অনুমতি নিয়ে এখনই আপনার অনুমতি নিয়েছি। আমি ইংরেজিতে বলবো, হিন্দিতে বলতে পারি, কিন্তু হিন্দিতে ডাবল টাইম লাগবে, এটাই অনুবাদ আমার ট্রেনিং করতে করতে। সো আমি ইংরেজিতে বলবো, অনুমতি আছে? Today we are observing the 77th anniversary of the NBA. It should have been the 75th normally, because 25th, 50 and 75 we do it, but because of the elections and things like that, I think it's been postponed. But it started with a very evocative and a very well-designed inaugural program, an admixture of commentary, of poetry, of painting, music. And that I'm recollecting this because NBA had played a very important role when my generation was growing up. Most of the literature that we could read in India, which was made available to us, and what NBA those days used to do, which I'm doing even now, but I'm only urging them to do more, is to bring out collections on certain specific issues. And only the other day, when this entire debate on nationalism that the BJP started, that Bharat Mata Ki Jai is the only slogan of patriotism, not Netaji's Jai Hind, not Hindustan Zindabad. So in order to go back and refresh myself about reading on the national question, I looked for the NBA publication on Lenin and Stalin on the national question. And because that contained everything together. So I think because NBA today, I believe, apart from the glorious role it played, it has a very important role now and in the future. Because what we see in the world today is a rightward shift in politics. And that rightward shift also in India. And that is what also explains also what is happening in Bengal today. I'll come back to it later. But to counter the present threats, not only to Marxism, but even to what we are all used to, like democracy, civil liberties, it is essential that the ideological battle will have to be strengthened and carried forward. And in that context, NBA has a new but a very important role. I think in today's conditions, more important than the role it played in the past. And I only hope and wish and urge them that from this observation onwards, they'll continue to play that role. I have been asked to speak on neoliberalism, communalism, and the intellectual resistance. It's a very vast canvas, but I'll try to put some points together which I think are essential ones as far as I feel, so that we can reach up to the point of what is the type of intellectual resistance that we are looking for. What is this neoliberalism today? It is essentially a new phase in the capitalist development, a phase that is seen by the marked rise of what is known as international finance capital. It is a phase that is different from the phase of inter-imperialist conflicts generated by finance capital and the industrial capital's coalescence in various imperialist countries and the inter-imperialist rivalries of the period of Lenin. But that does not mean that Lenin is wrong. It only means that Lenin's times were different from our times. Like Lenin analyzed those times and came to the correct conclusion of utilizing the inter-imperialist contradictions to make the break in the imperialist chain of the world at the weakest link, and then followed with the Russian Revolution. In today's context, neoliberalism is different from that context, but inter-imperialist rivalries cannot ever be dead. And that we are seeing now what happened with the Brexit vote, a conflict between British finance capital and European finance capital. And the conflict between the Bank of England and the Bank of European Union or the Bank of Germany. And this having its ripples in the United States of America in the election campaign of what you're seeing Mr. Donald Trump talking about very many things. But it's actually a reflection of the discontent among the people that is brewing. Brexit vote is a reflection of the discontent. 1.5 million people who marched in Paris 2 weeks ago is a reflection of that discontent. And that growing popular discontent of the people, where will it, who will be the ones or behind whom will this discontent consolidate itself? Be it behind the right-wing forces or behind the left-wing forces. That is the political conflict that is there in the world today. The left-wing, consolidation developed in Latin America. In order to scuttle that, you see now what is happening with the United States interventions in Brazil and Venezuela after Hugo Chavez's death. The way they are intervening there to ensure that the left-wing consolidation in Latin America will be scuttled and to move it towards the right wing. Whole world today is seeing a right-wing shift in politics, including our own country. And this right-wing shift that is taking place in the world is a direct consequence of the intensification of exploitation under neoliberalism. Now, this neoliberalism phase that entered world capitalism coincided with the collapse of the Soviet Union and collapse of the then existing socialist bloc. The whole world was suddenly opened up for capitalism, for its exploitation. And then came in this phase of these sort of neoliberal reforms and the emergence of finance capital, which happens independently. Elementary law of capitalism, which Marx has taught all of us, is that as capitalism develops, there is a tendency for the accumulation and centralization of capital. The greater and greater this accumulation and centralization, the greater and greater is the growth of monopolies, and the greater and greater is the accumulation of this capital. The other important thing that Marx taught all of us is that the raison d'être, or the essence of capitalism's existence, is its drive for profit. Profit maximization is the essential engine of capitalist development and for capitalism. So in a world where the correlation has changed in its favor with the collapse of the Soviet Union, the whole world available for being exploited in a much more intense manner than before, the onslaught of finance capital for maximization of profits, and that is the genesis of neoliberalism. How to maximize these profits? What are the economic reforms required? The financial liberalization required that no country can stop international finance capital from entering its country, making profits and leaving its country. No restrictions can be put, and that is the essence of financial liberalization. Every country will open up its own markets and resources for international capital to maximize its profits. That is the logic of the FDI that has been opened up by this Modi government last week across the board in every industry, so that finance capital can have access to our markets, our resources, our cheap labor. Our people will be exploited more, like the bulk of the world's people. The whole of Europe today and the whole capitalist world is today in the face of such exploitation. But why did this happen? Because this reckless drive for profit maximization created in itself a new contradiction that capitalism is not able to overcome, and in the final analysis, it cannot overcome except by further intensifying exploitation of the people. And what is this contradiction? The greater the profit maximization, the greater the impoverishment of the vast mass of people. The greater their impoverishment, the lower the purchasing power in the hands of the people. If people cannot buy what capitalism produces, then capitalism cannot develop. Globalization and these neoliberal reforms brought about that situation. Towards the first 5 years of the century, which finally manifested itself, I'm cutting a long story short, but it manifested itself in the global financial meltdown in 2008. Today, if you look at the statistics put out by the world, the top 10%, or why 10%, even the top 1% of the world's rich people account for the earnings and the living standards of at least one half of humanity, 50% of the people, the poor people in the world. This sort of a widening of income inequalities. Some people have more than enough money to spend, but the vast majority do not have. And if there is no purchasing capacity, capitalism cannot grow. How to overcome that? Finance capital created a lot of new animals through which profit can be maximized. Financial instruments, these animals are the financial instruments. But all of that had to collapse. It was a bubble waiting to be burst. It burst in 2008. Today, 2016, for 8 years, the world capitalism has not been able to overcome this crisis completely. Every time it tried to overcome, a new crisis has come. Bail out the financial institutions that caused this meltdown. Financial institutions were bailed out, but the governments incurred the debt. So financial bankruptcy or corporate bankruptcy was converted into governmental bankruptcy. To bail out the governments, you had to give funds, and those funds coming from again the international organizations, and giving those funds to bail out the governments meant that these governments will reduce their expenditures, which means reduce whatever little welfare expenditure they were doing for the people. And this is what is now being called as the austerity measures. The austerity measures in Europe is creating the political upheaval that we are seeing today. 5 phases of this crisis have gone through, and every solution they gave created a far more deeper crisis. No crisis, no solution in sight. And in this situation, when there is no solution in sight, with a rightward shift in global politics, we need to now recollect, going back to the 1929 Great Depression, the first big shock for global capitalism. In that Great Depression, one of the ways in which world capitalism emerged from that depression, one of the manner in which it emerged was with the rise of fascism. Hitler and fascism were seen as the messiah. Capitalism was seeing Hitler as the messiah that will take them out of this crisis. Why did he succeed at that point of time, Hitler? Though he had a lot of other things which all of us know, and the world had to rise in a world war to defeat him. But because of because of arming Germany in order to conquer the world, the biggest stimulus package the world has ever known so far, including today, was the armament expenditure that Hitler undertook. And that generated a lot of jobs, that generated money in the hands of the people who could then purchase what capitalism would produce. And monopoly capital in the world saw in Hitler the messiah. that he will deliver. That's why I remember Hitler always had a photograph of Henry Ford on his study desk. And when he was asked once saying, why are you keeping Henry Ford's photograph? He said, he is my hero. So the linkage between a right-wing shift and a capitalist crisis, history is shown, and today it is showing once again. And the strong state that is required, as at that point of time Hitler was seen as a messiah, was actually the response to the cries of profit maximization in periods of intense economic crisis, that the corporate world sees the need for a strong leader, a decisive leader. And what is the strong leader or decisive leader expected to do for the corporates to maximize their profits? Here I think I'll just quote Professor Eric Hobsbawm, one of the most profound thinkers, not only historians of the 20th century, and till his death a couple of years ago, he was actually working on his next book, which I wish somebody would complete. But anyway, Hobsbawm, with all the work that he had done on capitalism, he has this to say what the corporates expect from a strong leader. And then what he says is, I quote, that big business can come to terms with any regime that does not actually expropriate it, and any regime that comes to terms with it. Fascism has some major advantages for business over other regimes, unquote. And what are the advantages? He lists out. Elimination of labor unions. Just connected with in the coming session of Parliament, the Prime Minister has announced he is bringing legislations for labor reforms in India. The weakening or the defeat of the left. You see the manner in which the targeting our bastion and stronghold in Bengal, and the manner to which, what sort of violence, that this targeting of the left and weakening of it is to be done. Weakening of the left, weakening of people's resistance, weakening of public resistance, abolition of trade unions or weakening them, all these are measures that capitalism requires under a period of crisis. Indian capitalism, notwithstanding the last 2 years of propaganda that we are seeing, notwithstanding the 7.9 to 7.6 growth rate, India fastest growth rate that we are having, we have crossed China, we have overbeaten China, all this propaganda that you see, China has very quietly yesterday informed the world that India's GDP is 1/5 of its GDP. It's only 20% of Chinese GDP. If China is growing at 6% and India is growing at 7.6%, the difference is 1:5 in terms of generational wealth. Anyway, that apart. But notwithstanding all that, what is the state of our economy today? We have today our industrial growth rate, last year, index of industrial production, was 0.1%. 0.1. Last year, the growth of manufacturing, minus 1.1%. Last year, in agricultural growth, even if you accept the government figures which ask you, are skeptical, but even if you do, it's 2.3%. Your farmers' use tax continue. Your prices are rising day by depriving the purchasing power in the hands of the people for anything else other than for survival. Your employment, the 8 core industries that employ the maximum number of people in India have registered a growth in employment last year of 1.35 lakhs. Prime Minister Modi had promised in 2014 that his government will generate 2 crores of jobs every year. 1.3 crore of our new youth join the employment market in India every year. As against 1.3 new youth, forget the backlog of unemployment. The new youth who are joining 1.3 crores, the job creation is 1.3 lakhs, 1%. No growth of employment. Agrarian distress is deepening. Farmer suicides are continuing. Your industry is not growing, stagnating. Agriculture, as just said, services sector. International agencies have now shown that in the services sector, for the first time in the last 10 years, Reuters has put up last week a big study which says for the first time in the services sector there is sluggishness in India. So industry, agriculture, services, these are the three components of your GDP. If this is their reality, where does this figure come from, 7.6%? That is the statistical jugglery. I've said this in Parliament. I think because the chair found it unparliamentary, but now he can't find it unparliamentary here. There's an old English saying which says, lies, damned lies and statistics. The statistical manipulation is what he's done, but the actual reality, ground reality, we know. Now in this situation, Indian corporates, global corporates, wanted a messiah in India, like they wanted the messiah in Hitler in Germany. A messiah in India who will deliver their job, who will collaborate with foreign capital more and more to allow them access for profit maximization. And that is exactly what Prime Minister Modi did in his fourth visit in the last 2 years to the United States last month, where he signed all these agreements, where you have now opened up everything, including defense production for FDI, and the civilian nuclear deal. We have signed a deal which allows the Westinghouse Corporation to open its nuclear plant, stop production more than 3 decades ago. They are cleaning the cobwebs in the nuclear plant to start production because India is going to buy those reactors. So we have opened up, collaborated with foreign finance capital, got their endorsement. Inside the country for the corporates, change in labor laws, you will have this entire, with the restriction. Supreme Court had to come down on this government saying, in a drought year, you're not doing enough for the farmers. Your REGA, rural employment, has actually been, allegations have been slashed. So the attack on the living conditions of people domestically, support of international finance capital internationally, and that is accompanied by a right-wing shift of our politics. So neoliberalism and communalism, the linkage is this. This is not merely some sort of an idea communalism which some people fancy and therefore they say that India should be a Hindu Rashtra. But in today's context, this is integrally and intrinsically tied with the capitalist crisis and the developments in neoliberalism, which today creates a buffer that is engendering a rightward shift in Indian politics, and that rightward shift is today being led by the RSS BJP and the sort of communalism that they have. And this is not again only confined to this capitalist crisis and neoliberalism. The genesis of the RSS version of what they call the Hindu Rashtra is something that is born out of our freedom struggle. The same decades that we heard today in the inaugural part of this function, the decade of the 1920s, 30s, though NBA started in 1939, right? But decades preceding that, an intense ideological churning took place in the Indian national movement, which continues till today. And that is on the question of what will be the future of an independent India. One vision, a mainstream vision that was led by the Congress then, was that India will be a secular democratic republic. The stream that I belong to, the left, the communist stream, we said that is not sufficient. Merely declaring a secular democratic republic is not sufficient. Even that can be sustained. Otherwise it cannot be sustained. Even that can be sustained only when you carry forward our political independence to the economic independence of every individual in India, and that can happen only under socialism. As opposed to this, the conflicts between this are there for obvious for everybody to see. It was the Congress's practice of the development of capitalism which led to this sort of a situation where this economic independence we could not give, we cannot give with this trajectory. But that is a different area of struggles. But opposed to both these visions was the third vision. And the third vision defined the character of independent India would be decided by the religious affiliation of its people. Thus was born the concept of the Islamic State by the Muslim League and the concept of the Hindu Rashtra by the RSS. The unfortunate partition, creation of the Islamic State, its division into Pakistan and Bangladesh is all history that we know, that how religion cannot be a sustainable basis for a nation. But this battle did not end in 1947 or 1950 when we adopted the Constitution. In the Constitution, what did we say? We defined our nationalism as what? That the first clause of the Constitution says India is a union of states. States, linguistic nationalities. We are a union of various diversities, linguistic, religious, language, culture, ethnicity, traditions. All that put together, the concept was Indian nationhood. Indian nationalism is Indian nationhood. Whatever be our separate identities, we'll have a caste identity, a regional identity, a linguistic identity, but all of them are subsumed under the identity of Indian nation. But as opposed to that, what was this concept? That no, it is only a Hindu nation, which actually is a Hindutva nation. It's wrong to say it's a Hindu Rashtra. It should be Hindutva Rashtra. And what is this Hindutva? Savarkar, Vinayak Damodar Savarkar, he was the first one to have coined this phrase Hindutva. And in a small pamphlet he wrote, Hindutva has nothing to do with Hindu religion. Hindutva is a political project, and he advanced the slogan, Hinduize the military, militarize the Hindudom. It was a political project. The project of creating a Hindu Rashtra in India according to their concept, and that was the entire thought of this Hindutva that had come about. So therefore, what does this require? The battle didn't end, as I said, in 47. Mahatma Gandhi was assassinated, but the Indian Constitution was fairly adopted as secular, democratic, republican constitution. But in order to convert that into the Hindu Rashtra, and that is the current battle. When you talk about communalism, that is the current battle going on in our country. The metamorphosis or the transformation of the secular democratic Republic of India into a rabidly intolerant fascistic Hindu Rashtra of the RSS definition, which actually should be Hindutva Rashtra. Because there's as many Hindus who are not, who don't agree with that. But this is the struggle that is going on. Transform or change the character of our republic. And if this is the effort today, which continued all the way along, but if this is the effort today, what does it require? What it requires is first and foremost that to replace nationalism from an inclusive Indian nationhood to an exclusive concept of Hindu Rashtra. That is the Hindus and Hindus alone, and that is their ideological treatise. Way back in 1939, after Savarkar's Hindutva, Golwalkar argued this in the most chilling manner. That Hindus and Hindus alone are the true inhabitants of this country. Anybody else who follows any other religion, any other practice, who refuses to get subsumed under the Hindu way of life, cannot be considered anything but foreigners. And how do such foreigners have to be treated? There is an adulation of how Hitler treated the Semitic races in Germany to purify the German nation. So this Hindu Rashtra nationalism is what I said about like the Bharat Mata Ki Jai, etc., all the slogans that are coming today, or what is happening as the UP elections come closer in various parts of UP, these communal tensions, and all the other manifestations. I'm not going into those details. I'm sure all of you understand. But this concept of nationalism that is confined to this Hindutva, Rashtra, this construction of nationalism, that is what it is, what happened in JNU. The students declared as anti-national, case of sedition. Those of us who went in solidarity with the students, case of sedition on us, that we are anti-national. If you do not shout Bharat Mata Ki Jai, as I said, you are anti-national. And in Hyderabad University, because the Dalit students were espousing that and the left and the Dalit movement was coming together, they said that is anti-national. You are not speaking in the interest of the nation. So nationalism becomes the weapon. And here, I think a slight digression we must understand because it is important. Nationalism was also the weapon used by Hitler. What was his concept of nationalism? He conceived Germany as an organism, as a living organism. And every German individual was considered a cell in that organism. And that is why he called this the body politic. The body politic of Germany, in order to strengthen it, he drew parallel. If you read his Mein Kampf, he tells you how the body and nature, the origin of species, he talks of, and he says how nature selects itself in order to overcome and survive is how? By the body getting rid of inferior cells or diseased cells, and unless the body cleanses itself of these inferior cells or diseased cells, the body cannot be strong. For the German nation to be strong, you have to cleanse the German nation of inferior cells, that is inferior people, because it's talking of nation, country is the organism. And these inferior people are who? These are the non-Aryans. This is the Hitler definition of Aryan, but it is the non-Aryans. And that are the Semitic races, and then the entire Holocaust of the Jews, the persecution, the desire for dominating the world, and the Second World War. Finally, the world had to lose some 40 million people in order to defeat this concept of nationalism that German fascism put forward. This parallel is because it's chilling. Like the inferior had to be expelled in order to protect the superior and create a more powerful body. Otherwise, Hitler said, the inferior will outnumber the superior if you do not intervene. What is the argument we hear today? The Muslims, the Christians, the communists, the Dalits, all of them can outnumber the superior Hindu race. And if you want to protect the Hindu Rashtra, then that sort of a method will have to be followed, and that leads up to all these communal riots, confrontations, and the programs against the religious minorities. So this chilling similarity is what we'll have to understand here today, and that is why this communalism is not only of one campaign or the other. It's not only Ghar Wapsi, not only Love Jihad, not only Bharat Mata Ki Jai, not only JNU, not only Hyderabad, not only Kairana, not only the one incident there, one incident here, or the election comes, the communal tensions, but it's part and parcel of a larger metamorphosis of India. And that is why this sort of a metamorphosis we must seek to protect. Let me, lest I am misunderstood, I am drawing this parallel with Hitler's concept of nationalism. I am drawing this parallel with what he did and what the RSS seeks to emulate. Not to suggest that there is fascism in India today. What we are having today is not fascism yet, in the scientific sense. Fascism has two attributes. One, fascism means not merely a succession of one bourgeois government by another bourgeois government. Fascism means replacement of parliamentary democracy by a naked, terroristic dictatorship. That can happen only when we jettison our parliamentary democracy. We have not yet jettisoned, or we have not allowed them to jettison yet. I think that's a better formulation. We have not yet allowed them to jettison. Though there are more and more authoritarian attacks. We see what's happening in Uttarakhand, we saw what happened in Arunachal, we saw what is happening with the parliamentary methods and systems, how they are being undermined. We are moving there, but it's not yet happening. The second attribute of fascism is the complete elimination of the working class movement, trade union movement, and the communist parties. We have not yet reached there, but that is happening. What is the terror in Bengal? We have not yet reached there, but that is happening. What is the terror in Bengal all about? What is the terror that we are all of you are facing so bravely all about? So while it is not yet fascism, it is moving towards fascism. The question is, will we stop it from reaching fascism or not? It is not that we wait till fascism comes and then we will fight. Then there will be very few left to fight. But the point is to stop is a very, very important element. And why I am saying this, I can go on talking about this, but I think I've taken enough time. But why I am saying this is that I would want all of you to actually go back to a book which had a very, very big impact in the post-Second World War period. It was a treatise by George Lucas on, he called it The Destruction of Reason. After great persuasion, I think I've got one of the Indian publishers to republish it, the Akar publishers, but NBA should definitely take it up because this is very, very relevant today. George Lucas starts writing this book when Hitler was in power. This book is published in Hungary after the Second World War. But when you talk of the intellectual resistance, this book is all about that. And what does it show? And what is his conclusion that he comes to? That what he says is that along with other tendencies, the path towards Hitler and fascism in Germany was in the realm of philosophy. Please remember, one of the most important components of Marxism is German philosophy. He says from the days of Hegel, from the days of reasoning, German philosophy moved towards irrationalism and philosophical irrationalism. He describes it in a very way, which is exactly what is happening in our country today. That he says, I'm quoting from Lucas, irrationalism by its very definition is an ideological trend hostile to reason. Its main objective in all its manifestations, from the days of European Enlightenment to today's imperialist, to today's imperialist globalization, is to challenge the power of reason in human affairs, its capacity to provide knowledge about reality. Knowledge at any point of time can never explain the whole reality. Irrationalism negates the dialectical relationship between reality and knowledge. Objective reality, Lucas says, is far richer and complex than our knowledge of it. There's always a time, at every point of time, there's an ontological break between our knowledge and the entire reality. But reason propels you to unravel that, the difference between reality and our knowledge, and to increase our knowledge. Irrationalism, what it does is that reality can never be comprehended by rational knowledge, and therefore it has to be grasped only by faith, only by loyalty to a leader, only by intuition, or only by religion. But you can never conquer the reality, but irrationality suppresses that urge for reason to go on increasing knowledge to understand reality in its fullest sense. That suppression of reason laid the psychological basis among the German people, that they reached a stage where you required a Messiah. You require the Messiah on a white horse that will come and deliver to the German people, not through reason, but through unreason. This is not Lucas's contribution. Unreason is what I am adding to it. That the battle, intellectual battle, and therefore the intellectual resistance to this present situation that we have in our country, when you link up neoliberalism and communalism, is actually to strengthen the battle for reason against the battle for unreason. Because why will and how will communalism and their project of the Hindutva Rashtra, as I said, succeed in India? It can succeed only if they succeed in replacing Indian history with Hindu mythology. When they replace Indian philosophy with Hindu theocracy. And this is the effort going on. The changes in the syllabus, the new education policy, the appointment of people in research institutions, all that you're having, the effort is to replace reason-based historical inquiry by faith in your mythology. To replace the centuries-long tradition of philosophical inquiry in all the 6 schools of Indian philosophy that you can think of, to replace that tradition of philosophical inquiry by a faith in theology. That is the only way that they can succeed. So what is the resistance then? What is the intellectual resistance? The intellectual resistance is to defeat the forces of unreason and to take up the question of the hegemony of reason. And that is why today, when you talk of what this means in our actual terms, that reason is to strengthen the inclusive concept of Indian nationhood. Unreason is to weaken that concept and strengthen the concept of exclusive nature of Hindu nationalism. Reason today is to work for the social economic inclusion of all the marginal sections of our people into our daily life. Unreason today is to cement that division, and that is what you see in the support that they get from these forces, the honorary panchayats, antiquated institutions, how the BJP and this government doesn't really act against them. Reason today that to give equality to all our citizens as our constitution says, irrespective of caste, creed and sex. Unreason today is to create two categories of citizens. Those who are of the Hindutva variety and those who are the minorities, and they have very clearly also said that the three internal enemies that are stopping the emergence of this Hindutva Rashtra are the Muslims, the Christians and the communists. And now you can add that the Dalits, the tribals and the women, all the marginalized. Reason today is to have the unification of our people, celebrating our diversity. Unreason today is to impose the uniformity on that diversity. And that is the philosophy and the theory of communalism. So this battle, I can go on and on like this. What is reason, what is unreason? What you are seeing today, every day, in the activities of these forces is the spread of unreason. What we need today, as part of the intellectual resistance, is to defeat this unreason and ensure the triumph of reason. So this, I think, is the intellectual resistance required. That the intellectuals of our country, finally I will say, Paul Sweezy, one of the finest thinkers of modern India, not a communist, but he defined, he says, who is an intellectual? He says, intellectual is like a vegetable. It depends on the cook, how he'll cook the vegetable. He can either fry you, he can cook you, he can make a masala, whatever it is. But a true intellectual is who? Like Gramsci talks of, the organic intellectual. Organic in the sense that he is an intellectual whose intellects will be put to use for the cause of liberation of the human being with the exploited sections. And that organic intellectual, or that intellectual whose intellect can be useful for society, is the sort of intellectual that India needs today. And it is on the strength of such intellectuals, what India needs today is to defeat this philosophical strengthening of unreason in our thinking and work for the triumph of reason. That is the intellectual resistance that we must all need to work to, and to achieve that intellectual resistance. Yes, various activities, various parts, various fora, various discussions, all will take place. But unless each one of us internalizes that in this battle of reason versus unreason, I will stand by reason and I shall work for the defeat of unreason. If that is not done, like the German people who lamented much later after the Second World War, when the time was there for them to fight these forces of unreason, the fact that they did not allow unreason to triumph, that is what we have to stop. It is not yet triumphed, but it will triumph if you and I don't do anything. And if you and I become passive and say this is somebody else's job, I am not being killed today, it's only the CPIM being killed, it's only the trade unions being killed, so why should I get worried? Remember that pastor in Germany, we've quoted him very often, I like that, pastor in that region, pastor was saying, they are not coming to attack me, they are left of the communists, so I won't say anything. He came to attack the communists. I said nothing because I was not a communist. Then they came to attack the Jews. I said nothing because I was not a Jew. Then they came to attack the trade unions. I said nothing because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came to attack the Christians and the church. I said nothing because I was not a Christian. And he goes on. And then he says, finally they came to attack me. There was no one left to say anything for me. all the others were gone. Either we accept that situation, or the battle must be strengthened, that intellectual resistance must be strengthened to defeat these forces of unreason and ensure the triumph of reason. And I think finally that is where the NBA has a very important role to play, to assess the forces of reason against this unreason. And I'm sure, given his reputation, given his commendable work and tremendous work for the Indian cause of the Indian people, it will discharge these tasks in the coming days with that hope and with that urge. I thank you very much for your patient hearing and that will